Hi, I'm Domino with Guardian Angel League, and I am here today with Bossoskills, who is giving us a little bit of his time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Bosso. I've been playing TFT for around 5 years now, and I'm 24 and I live in New York.
I am curious to know a little bit what your gaming background is, what gaming was for you before TFT, before becoming a pro player, and how you kind of got into TFT in the first place.
Yeah, so I have a pretty common background, I would say, for TFT. I played a lot of strategy games growing up, so games like I played Pokemon, I played chess, I played a lot of board games with my family, things like Catan, Dominion, which I guess is more of a card game. I played poker, I played bridge, and then like the really easy connection that a lot of people have is like I played League of Legends.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably where most TFT pros came from. So yeah, pretty common standard, I guess, gaming before TFT.
Yeah, super fair. I mean, the transition to from League to TFT is certainly a common one. What kind of pushed you over the edge to becoming a pro player, and if you've been full time since then?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't really like a specific incident. There was no real like eureka moment where I decided like, oh, I can do this. It was kind of something I started when I was in school during COVID, so I just had a lot of time on my hands. I kind of just wanted to do something, right? Like I didn't really
Yeah.
have that much to do. I was just playing a bunch of TFT, and then I got pretty good at it pretty fast. So I decided to just keep playing and see where that went. But there was no real like light bulb moment for me where I decided, oh, I want to do this. I want to commit myself to a lot of this. It was sort of a convenience thing.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, and I think a lot of the timelines for pro players kind of go around COVID as well, where everybody suddenly had a lot of time on their hands to get so much better at this game. And I mean, you said earlier you've been playing for about 5 years at this point, and we've seen you in countless tournaments and events. In your opinion, what do you think separates, a high-ranking ladder player and a pro player that's actively in the circuit?
A lot of stuff just kind of comes down to experience, and then a lot of it also, as kind of cliche as it sounds, just is like how good you are. Generally, like to be high ladder, especially now, doesn't mean as much as it used to. Before, if you were high ladder, you were pretty much guaranteed to be like a top 10, top 20 player on the server, just because like everyone cared about ladder a lot. But after the release of Pro Circuit, it's a lot harder to kind of get a grasp of where you actually are based on how good you are at ladder.
Mm.
Because a lot of the pros don't really take ladder as seriously anymore, and really are just focused on tournaments. And then the other thing is a lot of people who are specifically good at ladder, the skills don't completely transition. I think a lot of people actually that were very good at ladder had struggles, or some people had struggles in tournaments because like it was kind of just wired into their brain a different reward system essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a big difference at the end of the day, like what kind of play style you want to adopt, whether you're playing on ladder or you're playing in a tournament. I'm curious to see what on your side kind of like prep looks like when you're coming into these big tournaments like this weekend.
It's like both study group and then both personal things, right? Like I'll trust my study group on info and like general sort of understanding of like what comps are good and what comps are bad, right? And generally, I think it's very hard to prep as a solo player now, especially for like the bigger tournaments. I do think in tier two that like if you are just above I think there's a lot more room for like a skill gap in tier two. So if you are at like the upper end of that skill gap, I do think it's not actually necessary to prep with a study group. Yeah, I like the higher levels. Generally, you want to spend like a lot of your own time figuring out like exactly how to play the lines and like basically like what all the OP things that you should be looking for in like stage two, stage three are for like your forecast lines, for example. Your study group is not necessarily going to know all of them, and even if they did, they can't give you like a 10-page list of all the details of like the comps
Right.
that you could play are. So a lot of like the study group stuff is like general information, and then you kind of have to go put it into practice, right? A lot of the things are like
Hmm.
if Wasian tells me this comp is good, right? I have to figure out how to play the comp. Right? There's just some things that can't be explained through words, right? And they just have to be explained through experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, really. One of the big aspects of TFT is that this prep is never ending with not only how often the sets change, but also how often the patches kind of flip the game upside down.
A lot of people really like that patch, myself included. Like a lot of people are saying, if this was the first patch, it would be the best set of all time, stuff like that. I would say like I'm a little lower on it, not because it's necessarily a bad patch, but it's the classic like if you feel like something wasn't going very well, then like the improvement relative to whatever you were experiencing before feels a lot better. And I quite frankly haven't played I haven't played any ladder this patch. I've only played scrims pretty much. I wonder how my experience and like other people's experience would be different if they went through like the full 2 weeks and were just playing on ladder like people normally do, right? It's just a very different environment. As for me personally, I do really like the patch. I think it's more interesting. I think we basically went too far in the other direction where before like 3 cost reroll was not really a thing and like fast 9 wasn't really a thing versus now I think they're both pretty dominant on the patch. So I'm not necessarily sure that it's better. It's just kind of like the opposite of what we had before.
Yeah, to some extent, the patch is kind of just meant to refresh and play what you couldn't play, earlier on in the set. You were saying that you've played mainly scrims for this last patch and not actually played on ladder. And I think this is something interesting because when a lot of spectators, when we watch these tournaments, we see boards or strategies necessarily that we're not seeing all that much on ladder. It's going to be interesting, I think, to see the second weekend of the tournament. Do you have any strategy planned? How are you feeling about it going into the weekend?
I feel all right. It's definitely I think this is probably the hardest patch to gauge exactly where you are compared to other people and compared to your prep, just because everything is so different. So I think it's very hard for anyone to actually feel like they have a large edge going into this tournament. Like I think if they do, they probably are just like misunderstanding like how confident they are in themselves. Although I wish I could be confident and say like I'm sure I have a huge edge. I just think too many things have changed for that to necessarily be true. I do. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
It's kind of just how are you feeling about it, and if you have any if you had any strategy going into it, because some people will like go into tournament and be like, I'm playing multi-hard reroll, forcing it every game or almost. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Generally, I feel the least comfortable playing Fast Nine and feel like it's most volatile during tournaments. So I probably won't be playing any Fast Nine except from like the top 5% spots to do so.
right.
Other than that, I don't really have any sort of plan along the lines of forcing Malzahar reroll or forcing anything else. I don't think anything is that strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of everybody else who's also considering their plans for the weekend, who do you think we should be keeping an eye on?
There's been a lot of interesting discourse, I guess, on like tier lists and like how good people are going into regionals. I do think people that I would look out for just in terms of like narrative. I'm not really sure on. Again, I think it's really hard to know exactly the strength of the field because again, like so much stuff has changed and it's just like a very different patch than it's been in the past. I do think this is the type of patch that favors Setsuko a lot. And there was like I know there's a lot of discourse about like whether Setsuko is a fraud, right? And it's like because his pro circuit results haven't been like up to his standards. Like they've been good for like they've been good for like a normal player, like an average J1 player, but people kind of hold him to a higher standard.
Sure.
So I think the patch favors him a lot, and it's very interesting because I think a lot of people in the community are very divided about where he should be. And then I think the other person would probably be Chunnington, who's had like an amazing set so far. And I myself have personally said that I'm lower on him than a lot of other people have him, right? Because I think a lot of other people have him very, very high going into the set, going into the tournament. Sorry, not going into the set. But yeah, he's had a great set so far, but in the past hasn't really been like much of a threat. I'm kind of interested to see how he does. In terms of like people who I would expect to win, I mean honestly, it's hard to say that like you wouldn't expect Wajin to do well, considering like he won 3 tournaments in a row, obviously. And Michael, who had like the second highest. I think if you go through all of the regions, he had the second highest pro points after Weijin, like considering
Mm,
all the other regions. So in any other region, he would
right.
have gone to Worlds off of the pro point spot. And he has spoken a little bit about Twitter and being a bit unhappy that it just ended up like Weijin Iverson dropped a super nuke this set. So yeah, those are the people I keep an eye on, which I guess most of them aren't really hot takes.
I think it's always interesting for us, going into tournament, trying to go through our pick'ems, and there's not really a better advice to get them from another pro player. What has your experience been personally being in a very competitive context with people that you consider friends?
I used to be a lot more of a competitive person. I still am very competitive. You kind of get support from them, and then you kind of have to play against them. So a lot of that is like really helpful motivation wise, because I mean, nobody wants to be like the friend who loses any competition in the group, right? Because eventually it's going to get brought up at some point,
Sure.
even if it's like probably in a
Yeah.
playful way. But there's
Yeah.
definitely that competitive fire to want to win more because you're playing against your friends. I think in terms of like actually forming study groups, when I started playing, it was actually just me and Malala in a call, and we were both able to actually play in, I guess, what would have been tier two back then.
Yeah.
And he made it to regionals when it was just us in call. We never really got to like the next level of pro play before adding more people, but I do think that like people nowadays, especially in like tier two or people who are trying to break in, kind of over index on like having a lot of people helping them and like a lot of voices, where a lot of it just comes from the individual as well, and you just need
Yeah.
one guy to look at, or one guy or gal to look at, look over the vods with you and want to improve with
Right.
you.
Yeah, and I mean that definitely touches on, kind of my last question for today, which was for anyone who doesn't know, Guardian Angel League is an organization that supports people of marginalized genders and women in the TFT scene, and we have a particular interest in everything competitive. What would be your piece of advice for everyone else who's kind of just, knocking at the door and trying to break through?
Like a lot of it is just going to be like play a lot of games, make sure you have someone to look at your, at least one person
Look
to
at your
look at
games
stuff with
with.
and bounce ideas off of. And then I guess for like marginalized genders, I do actually think TFT is probably like the best chance right now. Like if you're trying to
Yeah.
go pro in any of the games, a lot of it is just like social stuff. I do think generally like we are the most accepting. I hope we are, at least in the spaces I've been in. Like quite a few female challenger players. I think Panchi competed in tier two. Harmony is also trying to get into. Yeah, there's definitely people on the cusp. The great thing is it's an individual game.
Yeah.
So like at the end of the day, if you want opportunities and you're able to be good enough to get them, right? There's no like team dynamics or politics or anything
Right.
that can really stop you for the most part, right? I'm
Yeah.
not really sure what the tier two scene is like, but it is just like, as far as I'm concerned, it's merit based, and I don't think there's been like any ladder scandals or anything on NA in a while. Yeah, like if you can
Yeah.
get there, you can get there, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice for us to be able to do these interviews with players.
Yeah, thanks again for hosting. I had a great time.
Great, thank you so much.